"They tried to kill me," she sobbed, clinging to the stranger. The rough texture of his shirt, an alien anchor against the dizzying void she'd just escaped. Her white dress torn and stained with dirt and blood, whispered against the rock beneath them. They watched me slip. Then they pushed. His arms, impossibly strong, had hauled her back from the abyss mere moments ago. The branch she desperately clung to was gone, swallowed by the immense darkness below. She was safe, impossibly, miraculously safe. For now. But who were they? And why did they want the woman dangling between life and death just moments before? Silenced forever. The wind, a low, mournful sound, swept through the high pines, carrying the last scent of daylight over the ridge below. Ethan moved with the quiet competence of a man intimately familiar with solitude and the rhythms of the mountain. The air grew cool, crisp, biting with the promise of a clear, cold night. He checked the cinch on his horse's saddle one last time, his calloused hand resting for a moment on the animal's sturdy neck as it drank from the trough beside the weathered barn. Stars were beginning to prick the deepening velvet of the sky, scattered like spilled diamonds above his remote ranch, his sanctuary, his inheritance, his life carved into the mountainside. It was peaceful, the kind of profound quiet that sinks into your bones, broken only by the sigh of the wind or the distant call of an owl. Ethan breathed it in the familiar scent of pine needles and damp earth. Another day done, another night settling in. He'd planned a quiet evening. Maybe mend that section of fence down by the creek, read a chapter from the worn paperback on his nightstand. Simple plans for a simple life. Then it shattered. A scream tore through the night air. Not an animal cry, not the wind playing tricks. It was human, a woman's scream. Sharp, desperate, shockingly close, Ethan froze, every muscle tensed. The saddle brush slipped from his numb fingers and clattered onto the packed earth. Silence rushed back in heavy expectant. Had he imagined it? Help! The voice was fainter this time, a ragged gasp swallowed almost instantly by the vastness. But it was real, raw. Terror vibrated in that single word. His heart hammered against his ribs. No time to think, only react. He broke into a run, leaving the barn and the patiently waiting horse behind his boots, pounded the dry ground, the sound echoing slightly in the stillness. He sprinted toward the sound's origin, the south cliff, the treacherous edge of his property, where the familiar woods thinned abruptly, giving way to a sheer, deadly drop into the shadowed valley below. A place he respected, even feared in the daylight. A place utterly unforgiving in the dark. The scream ripped out again, closer now, clearer. Pure, undiluted fear. It spurred him on, adrenaline surging through him. He reached the tree line, branches whipping at his face as he pushed through his breath, coming in harsh gasps. "Hello," he shouted, his voice hoarse. "Where are you?" Silence. Then not a scream, but a sob. A broken, whimpering sound. And something else. A faint scraping noise like branches bending under a weight they weren't meant to bear. He slowed his pace, pulling the heavy-duty flashlight from his belt. He moved cautiously toward the cliff edge, the beam cutting a stark white path through the oppressive darkness. Leaves rustled underfoot. The air felt colder here. The drop a palpable presence beside him. He swept the light back and forth along the precipice. And then he saw her. His breath hitched. It was an impossible sight. A woman suspended over the black abyss. She was clinging desperately to a single narrow branch that jutted out from the rock face at a precarious angle. Her dress impossibly white against the dark rock, even torn and smeared with dirt, and what looked terrifyingly like blood shimmered faintly ghost-like in the flashlight's glare, and the sliver of moonlight breaking through the pines. Her fingers were locked around the branch, knuckles stark white with strain. Her legs dangled over nothingness, hundreds of feet of empty air beneath her bare feet. Tangled dark hair obscured much of her face, but what he could see was a mask of sheer terror. Eyes wide and reflecting the beam of his light like a cornered animal, the branch groaned ominously with every tiny trembling movement she made. "Please," she choked out her voice, barely audible above the wind. "Please, don't let me fall." A pause, then a whispered, frantic addition. They tried. They tried to kill me." That last phrase jolted Ethan from stunned inaction. Kill her. He dropped to his knees, crawling the last few feet to the edge, the loose scree shifting under his weight. He could see the wood splintering where the branch met the rock. It wouldn't hold. Seconds, maybe less. No time for calls. No time for backup from the distant town. It was just him and her and the abyss. "Hey," he called, keeping his voice as calm, as steady as he could manage, despite the frantic pounding in his own chest. "Hey, I see you. You're going to be okay." He edged closer. "I've got you. All right. Just hold on. Hold on." She made a small, desperate sound, her grip visibly weakening. He saw her fingers start to slip. His mind raced. The rope. He always carried a length of sturdy climbing rope coiled on his belt, essential for navigating the steep pastures and mending fences in treacherous spots. Praying it was long enough, he scrambled back a few feet, found a thick, exposed tree root, deeply embedded in the earth, and secured one end with a knot he could tie in his sleep. Quickly, efficiently, he looped the other end around his own waist, cinching it tight. He eased himself over the edge, planting his boots firmly against the near-vertical rock face, leaning back against the rope's tension. Loose pebbles dislodged by his movement skittered down, vanishing into the black void below. "Listen to me," he said, his voice louder now, projecting authority, forcing calm. "I need you to trust me. I'm coming down to you. But you have to stay as still as possible. Can you do that?" "I'm slipping," she cried, her voice cracking with panic. I can't hold." "You can," he said firmly, starting his descent, hand over hand, bracing against the rough stone. "Just a little longer. Keep your eyes on me, not down. Look at me." The rough bark of the root system scraped his arms. The rock face was uneven, offering little purchase. He moved deliberately, testing each foothold. His focus narrowed entirely to the woman below and the straining branch. He could hear her ragged breathing, now see the sheer terror in her wide eyes. He was close, almost there. He braced himself, reaching out a hand. It shook slightly, betraying the calm in his voice. "I'm Ethan," he said, extending his hand further. "Palm up, I've got you. Take my wrist when I say." Her eyes locked onto his, a flicker of desperate hope, warring with the terror. "Vivian," she gasped out the name. A faint breath, just as he spoke, the branch emitted a loud, sickening crack. Wood fibers audibly tore. It sagged violently. "Now, Vivian. Let go, grab my wrist, now," he shouted, instinct taking over. She sobbed, let go of the branch, and lunged blindly toward his outstretched hand. He caught her wrist, his fingers closing around her fragile bones. Just as the branch ripped away from the cliff face, entirely plummeting silently into the darkness, her dead weight slammed against him. The rope jerked violently, biting into his waist, straining against the root anchor above. The force nearly pulled his boots from their precarious hold. He gritted his teeth against the sudden immense strain, his muscles screaming in protest. He held fast, gotcha, He grunted, planting his feet more firmly. He started the slow, agonizing ascent, pulling her slight weight up alongside him. Inch by painstaking inch, the root above groaned under the double load. The rope slipped fractionally against the rock, sending a jolt of panic through him. He bit it down. Almost there, he managed his voice, strained. "Don't look down." Too late. She whispered, tears streaming through the dirt on her face, her body limp against the rock beside him. He pulled harder, digging deep for a reserve of strength he wasn't sure he possessed. One final desperate heave, he got her arm over the lip of the cliff. She scrambled frantically, finding purchase on solid ground, collapsing onto the earth just seconds before he hauled himself up after her. He lay there for a moment, chest heaving, sucking in great gulps of the cold night air. Dirt and grit clung to his sweating skin. Blood trickled from a fresh scrape on his forearm, but he barely registered the sting. He pushed himself up onto his elbows and looked at her. Vivian was curled into a tight ball, shaking uncontrollably, great racking sobs tearing through her. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders convulsing. He crawled over to her, kneeling beside her trembling form. He hesitated, then gently placed a hand on her shoulder. It felt impossibly fragile beneath his rough, calloused fingers. "It's over," he said softly, his own voice rough with exhaustion and adrenaline. "You're safe now." She slowly lifted her head, her eyes wide, hollow-haunted. Then, without warning, she threw her arms around his neck, clinging to him like he was the only solid thing in a world that had just tried to swallow her whole. She cried into his chest, raw, broken sounds. "They tried to kill me," she repeated, her voice muffled against his shirt, the words stark and terrifying in the vast silence of the mountain night. "They thought I was dead." Ethan held her as she trembled, his gaze sweeping the dark, silent tree line. Beyond them, whatever or whoever she had escaped from. He had a chilling feeling this was far from over. But for tonight, she was alive. And against all odds, she was safe. For now. The walk back through the woods was agonizingly slow. Dawn was still just a promise, a faint grey bruising the eastern horizon, offering little light beneath the dense canopy of pines. Ethan half-supported Vivian. Eleanor, she'd gasped her name between ragged breaths, his arm steady around her waist, though he took care not to hold her too tightly. She leaned on him, less out of trust, he suspected, than sheer, bone-deep exhaustion and shock. Her bare feet stumbled on unseen roots and sharp stones, each muffled cry of pain cutting through the pre-dawn quiet. Her torn white dress, a cruel mockery of celebration, snagged on low branches, dragging limply through the dirt and fallen needles. Ethan navigated the familiar path, mostly by instinct, his other hand holding the flashlight low, guiding their steps, his mind racing with the implications of her terrified words. They tried to kill me. Who were they, and why? Finally, the dark silhouette of his log cabin emerged from the trees, nestled against the slope near the ridge. Smoke curled faintly from the stone chimney. The embers from last night's fire still held a little warmth. It looked solid, steadfast, a haven against the wildness surrounding it. A haven he wasn't sure it could truly be for her. He pushed open the heavy wooden door, it never needed locking way out here, and flipped the switch just inside. A single lamp cast a warm yellow glow across the pine-paneled walls, illuminating the simple lived-in space. A worn leather couch facing a cold stone fireplace, bookshelves overflowing with paperbacks, a sturdy wooden table, and chairs, a small kitchenette tucked into one corner. The air smelled of cedar-rolled books, and the lingering trace of morning coffee he hadn't yet brewed here, Ethan said quietly, his voice sounding loud in the enclosed space. He gently guided her towards the couch, releasing his supporting arm as soon as she was steady. He took the thickest wool blanket from the back of it and offered it to her. She took it without meeting his eyes, her fingers trembling as she wrapped it tightly around her shoulders, pulling it close like a shield. She didn't sit immediately. Her eyes darted around the cabin, scanning the corners, the windows, the single door, as if expecting danger to materialize from the shadows. When the floorboards creaked under Ethan's weight as he moved towards the fireplace, she flinched violently, a small gasp escaping her lips. Her breath still came in shallow, rapid bursts. Ethan stopped, holding up his hand slightly. "Easy," he said softly. "It's just me. You're safe here now." He knelt down, a few feet away from the couch, resting his forearms lightly on his knees, trying to appear non-threatening, grounded. He kept his voice low. "No one's going to find you here. Not tonight. Not yet." A grim voice added in his head. Eleanor didn't respond. She sank onto the edge of the couch cushions, still clutching the blanket, her gaze fixed on the window that looked out onto the dark woods. Her expression was guarded, haunted her mind, clearly miles away, replaying horrors he couldn't yet imagine. He busied himself, quietly adding a few logs to the fireplace, coaxing the embers back to life. The crackle of the reviving flames filled the silence, a small pocket of warmth against the lingering chill. He fetched a glass of water from the pump by the sink and placed it gently on the small wooden table beside the couch near her hand. She didn't acknowledge it. He retreated to a wooden chair across the room, giving her space, waiting patiently. The silence stretched, broken only by the fire and her uneven breathing. When she finally spoke, her voice was rough, cracked with exhaustion and fear. "You don't understand," she whispered, still staring out the window. "They'll be looking for me. They always find me." Ethan waited, letting the silence prompt her more gently than any question could. "Who Eleanor?" he asked, using the name she'd given him, testing it. She hesitated, swallowing hard. Her eyes finally flickered towards him, assessing, searching. Then, as if a dam inside her broke, the words began to tumble out low and rushed at first, then gaining a desperate clarity. My full name is Eleanor Prescott." She watched his face for a reaction, but Ethan kept his expression neutral, encouraging her to continue. "My father, he owns Prescott Capital, one of the largest investment banks on the East Coast." Her voice was flat, devoid of pride, stating a fact that sounded more like a burden. I was his only child." The heir. Ethan's eyebrows lifted slightly. Prescott Capital. He'd heard the name, of course, whispered in news reports about market shifts and global finance, a world utterly removed from his own. He said nothing, just nodded slowly. They arranged a marriage. She continued, her voice becoming brittle, devoid of emotion, now to Vincent Thorne. Again she paused, gauging his reaction. Thorne. That name also rang a distant bell, associated with ruthless acquisitions and cold power. You might have heard of him. He's more than just powerful. He's dangerous. Her hands tightened on the blanket. Charismatic when he wants to be. But underneath, he's cold, controlling. He doesn't love anything. He just owns things. She pulled the blanket tighter, a shiver running through her. Despite the growing warmth from the fire, I didn't want it. The wedding hymn. I begged my parents, my father, to stop it. But it was a merger, not a marriage. A strategic move to consolidate empires. Her voice dripped with a bitterness that felt old, deep-seated. I was just a piece on the board. My feelings didn't matter. Only the Prescott name, the legacy. Her gaze shifted back to the window, her voice dropping to a near whisper. Then, I found out something. Vincent, he never wanted me. He wanted Prescott Capital. He wanted the access, the control my name would give him. I wasn't a bride. I was a key. She took a shaky breath, so I ran. The night before the wedding, Ethan leaned forward slightly, listening intently. My driver. Someone I thought I could trust. He helped me. We drove for hours through the night, heading west, trying to disappear. I actually thought I'd made it, that I was finally free. A broken sound, half laugh, half sob escaped her. But they found me. She whispered the words, barely audible. Vincent's men, not his regular security. These were different professionals, ruthless. Her eyes widened, reliving it. They chased us on the mountain roads, forced us off the main highway. My driver, Miguel, he tried to lose them, but they cornered us. Her voice broke. I think they caught him. I heard shouting, but I just ran. I didn't look back. She turned to face Ethan fully, then her eyes wide and haunted, swimming with unshed tears. I ran into the woods, upwards, until there was nowhere left to go. The cliff edge, it was dark. I slipped near the edge. I grabbed onto that branch. Her breath hitched. They came. His men stood right there, looking down at me. Her voice was laced with disbelief. Even now, I thought. For a second, maybe they'd help me up. Silence hung heavy in the cabin. The fire crackled oblivious. They didn't help. Eleanor whispered, the final horrifying piece falling into place. They watched me cling there. And then, one of them, he pushed the branch. He pushed it down. Hard. Her composure finally shattered completely. She dropped her face into her hands, and the sobs came. Ragged, breathless, unstoppable, tearing through the fragile quiet of the cabin. Years of suppressed fear, suffocating control, and profound betrayal erupted in a storm of grief. Ethan moved instinctively, sliding from his chair to sit on the couch beside her. He didn't touch her, didn't invade her space, but sat close enough that she might feel his presence as an anchor in the storm. He waited until the worst of the sobs subsided into shuddering breaths. They failed, he said gently, his voice rough with emotion. You're still here, Eleanor. She nodded, wiping furiously at her tears with the edge of the blanket. I don't know how she choked out. How that branch held for even a second after... Or how you... Doesn't matter. How Ethan replied, his gaze steady. What matters is, you're alive. And whatever happens next, you're not alone in this. Eleanor looked at him, then truly looked at him, her swollen eyes searching his face. You don't even know me. I know enough, he said simply. I know what they tried to do. I know you didn't deserve it. He paused, his voice firm but kind. And I know you deserve a chance to just breathe, to heal. You're safe here, Eleanor. I won't let anyone hurt you. For a long moment, she just looked at him, a fragile flicker of something unreadable, disbelief, hope in her eyes. The darkness outside was still immense, the threat still real, but within the warm, cedar-scented walls of this stranger's cabin, perhaps safety wasn't entirely impossible. It was the faintest glimmer, but for Eleanor Prescott, it was the first glimmer of light she'd seen in a very long time, and it was a start. The days settled into a quiet rhythm marked by the rising sun and the chores that governed life on Ethan's mountainside ranch. Time seemed to slow, cocooned within the vast silent wilderness, offering Eleanor a reprieve she desperately needed. She slept fitfully at first, haunted by falling nightmares that left her gasping in the dark. But the solid walls of the cabin and Ethan's unobtrusive, steady presence were a constant reassurance. Slowly, the raw terror began to recede, replaced by a deep weariness and a fragile caution. She started spending time outdoors cautiously, at first just sitting on the porch steps, watching Ethan work with the horses or mend fences. The mountain air, clean and sharp, felt different here, bracing alive. She'd watch squirrels chase each other up ancient pines, listen to the chatter of unseen birds, feel the warmth of the afternoon sun on her face. Nature, in its vast indifference to her plight, paradoxically began to feel like a balm slowly grounding her fragmented spirit. Ethan, sensing her tentative steps towards healing, didn't push. He simply included her. He'd bring her coffee on the porch in the mornings, sometimes talking about the weather or the land, other times just sharing the comfortable silence. He showed her how to properly brush down the horses, their warm breath puffing clouds in the cool air. He even tried one morning to get her help collecting eggs from the small chicken coop. Eleanor approached the task with the cautious trepidation usually reserved for a hostile takeover negotiation. Dressed in a borrowed flannel shirt that swamped her slight frame and jeans rolled up at the ankles, she peered into the coop. Are you sure they don't bite?" she asked, eyeing a particularly fluffy hen. Warily, Ethan leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, a rare smile tugging at his lips. "They're chickens, Eleanor, not wolves. Just reach under them, gently." She took a deep breath, reached a hesitant hand towards a nesting box, and yelped as the hen shifted, clucking indignantly. An egg tumbled from her grasp, landing with a soft splat in the straw. Eleanor stared at the mess aghast. "Oh, I am so sorry. It just moved, Ethan." Chuckled a low, warm sound. "Happens to the best of us. Try again. And maybe leave." The Prescott Capitol boardroom. Stare behind. They respond better to a lighter touch. Eleanor shot him a look, half annoyed, half amused, before carefully, successfully retrieving another egg. A small victory, but it felt significant. The shared moment of light awkwardness chipped away another tiny piece of the wall between them. Their connection deepened in other ways, too. One evening, Ethan was wrestling with a stack of financial reports from the local farmers' co-op he was involved with, a struggling collective trying to compete against larger agricultural businesses. He sighed in frustration, running a hand through his hair. "Numbers," he muttered. "Might as well be ancient Greek." Eleanor, curled up on the couch, reading one of Ethan's worn paperbacks, looked over Problems. Hesitantly, Ethan explained the co-op's predicament. Rising costs, inefficient distribution difficulty securing fair prices. He pushed a ledger towards her. Maybe fresh eyes. Intrigued despite herself, Eleanor put down her book. Numbers were her language. She spent the next hour poring over the statements, her brow furrowed in concentration. The hesitant woman from the cliff edge seemed to vanish, replaced by someone sharp, analytical, and utterly focused. Finally, she looked up, tapping a page. "Here," she said, her voice gaining a familiar professional clarity. "Your overhead on transportation is disproportionate, and your Q3 projections aren't accounting for seasonal price fluctuations based on futures market trends. You could mitigate risk by hedging with derivatives, or at least explore collaborative logistics to achieve economies of scale." She paused, seeing his slightly bewildered expression. Basically, she added a small smile playing on her lips. "You're spending too much, getting things to market, and you're gambling on prices instead of locking in profits." Ethan blinked, "Okay, Professor Prescott," he said, a slow grin spreading across his face. "Can we get the Ethan-friendly translation for that derivative hedging part?" She laughed, a genuine warm sound this time. "Fair enough. It means finding ways to protect yourselves if prices drop unexpectedly." She spent another hour explaining, sketching out potential solutions on the back of an old envelope, using simple terms, her passion for strategy reignited in this unexpected context. Ethan listened, truly listened, asking sharp questions, impressed not just by her knowledge, but by her ability to make it accessible. He saw a glimpse of the capable woman she was beneath the trauma. Later, feeling a new level of comfort, Ethan found himself telling her about his grandfather, the man who had originally built the cabin and started the ranch, instilling in him a deep love for the land and a belief in community. The reason the co-op mattered so much to him, sharing that small piece of his past, felt natural, right? The fragile piece felt almost real, almost normal. They fell into an easy routine. Shared meals, quiet conversations, Eleanor slowly regaining strength, Ethan feeling the sharp edges of his solitude soften with her presence. One evening over a simple dinner of stew Ethan had made, Eleanor looked thoughtfully at her bowl. "You know," she said, swirling her spoon, "back home, rustic, usually meant a 5-star lodge with reclaimed wood beams and a sommelier who knew your preferred vintage before you did. This," she gestured around the simple cabin, "is just real." Ethan raised an eyebrow. Disappointed. "There's no sommelier hiding in the pantry." She smiled genuinely. "Strangely, no. Just surprised that real feels better." It was later that same evening, after Eleanor had retreated to the small guest room Ethan had cleared out for her, that the fragile peace shattered. The air had turned colder, the wind picking up, whistling around the eaves of the cabin. Ethan decided on a final check of the barn and the perimeter, an old habit reinforced by their precarious situation. He walked the familiar path towards the tree line, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Everything seemed quiet. Too quiet, perhaps. He swept the light along the edge of the woods, scanning the undergrowth, and then the beam caught something small, half buried in the damp earth, and pine needles glinting faintly. He bent down, his heart suddenly pounding. He picked it up, a cigarette butt. But not just any cigarette. It was custom-rolled, slender, with a distinctive, unmistakable gold tip. Ethan's blood ran cold. He remembered Eleanor's description voice, trembling as she recounted the chase up the mountain roads, mentioning the specific expensive brand, favored by Julian Thorne's personal elite security detail there imported, unlikely to be found discarded by chance, deep in these remote woods. He stood frozen for a moment, the small, damning object heavy in his hand. The wind felt like ice against his skin. They hadn't just been lucky. They hadn't been forgotten. They had been found. He turned slowly, walking back towards the warm glow of the cabin, his boots, heavy dread coiling in his stomach. He pushed the door open. Eleanor looked up from her book, a questioning look on her face at his sudden return and grim expression. Wordlessly, Ethan held out his hand, opening his palm under the lamplight. Eleanor stared at the gold-tipped cigarette butt resting there. Recognition dawned instantly. The color drained from her face, leaving it chalk white. Her eyes widened in sheer primal terror. She scrambled back on the couch, pulling the blanket around her again, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. "No," she whispered, shaking her head frantically. "No, no, no. Eleanor." Ethan started his voice low, but she cut him off. Her voice, rising, cracking with renewed fear. "They know I'm alive," she gasped. her eyes darting wildly towards the dark windows. They were here, watching, waiting. She stumbled to her feet, backing away, as if the cabin walls were closing in. They know, oh God, Ethan. They know. The fragile sanctuary had become a cage once more. The whispers from the deep woods had finally arrived, and they were hunting her. The discovery of the gold-tipped cigarette shattered the fragile peace of the cabin as effectively as a thrown stone through a window. Eleanor's initial terror was a raw, physical thing. Tremors racking her body, her breath catching in panicked sobs. Ethan stayed with her, a solid grounding presence, not offering empty platitudes, but simply being there, a bulwark against the returning tide of fear. He checked the doors, the windows, kept the fire stoked high against the encroaching night, his own senses hyper-alert to any sound from the surrounding woods. But as the initial wave of panic subsided, replaced by the chilling certainty that they were exposed, something else began to stir within Eleanor. It wasn't courage, not yet, but a cold, hard anger. The anger of a cornered animal. Yes, but also the deeper indignation of someone whose life, whose very self had been treated as disposable. She spent a sleepless night staring into the flickering firelight. The image of that cigarette butt burned into her mind. Hiding hadn't worked. Running hadn't worked. Julian Thorne wouldn't stop until she was silenced permanently. By morning, a decision had formed, hard and clear in the grey dawn light filtering through the window. She found Ethan by the stove making coffee, his expression grim but steady. "I can't run anymore." "Ethan," she said, her voice quiet but firm, devoid of the previous night's hysteria. He turned, meeting her gaze. He saw the lingering fear, but also a new, steely resolve hardening her eyes. Hiding isn't living. It's just waiting. He won't stop, so she took a deep breath, the words tasting foreign but necessary on her tongue. "I have to stop him." Ethan searched her face, saw she meant it. His protective instincts screamed caution, but he also saw the spark of the woman she was reclaiming herself. He nodded slowly. "Okay, Eleanor. Okay, what do you need?" What she needed was expertise from a world she knew but could no longer safely access directly. Thinking rapidly, leveraging knowledge from her former life, she identified two names. People known for taking on the powerful operating outside the compromised circles. Her father and Thorne moved in Chloe Bennett, an investigative journalist with a reputation for breaking stories others wouldn't touch, known for her tenacity and digital forensic skills, and David Miller, a civil rights attorney renowned for tackling cases against seemingly untouchable figures, meticulous, strategic, and fiercely dedicated. Getting word to them securely was the first hurdle. Using cash Ethan had saved, Eleanor acquired a cheap burner phone and SIM card during a carefully planned trip to the nearest town, several hours away. Ethan waiting nondescriptly nearby. Back at the cabin, she composed a carefully worded encrypted message using layers of anonymizing software she vaguely remembered from corporate security briefings, reaching out first to Bennett through a known secure channel for whistleblowers. The reply came within hours, cautious professional requesting verification. A tense back and forth followed, Eleanor providing just enough unverifiable detail about Thorne's potential criminal activities, hinting at financial crimes beyond the attempted murder, to pique Bennett's interest without revealing her own identity or location. Immediately, Bennett, intrigued, and smelling a major story, agreed to loop in David Miller, whom she occasionally collaborated with. Their first meeting was a clandestine video conference call routed through multiple layers of security. Chloe Bennett appeared on the laptop screen first. Sharp features, intense eyes, Radiating a restless, impatient energy, David Miller joined a moment later. Calmer, older, his thoughtful expression conveying quiet authority. Eleanor huddled with Ethan by the cabin's fireplace, for warmth and moral support told them everything. The Prescott name, Julian Thorne, the forced engagement, the escape, the chase, the cliff, the cigarette butt. She spoke clearly, concisely, laying out the facts. The fear palpable, but controlled. Chloe listened intently, occasionally interjecting with sharp, probing questions. David remained mostly silent, observing his legal mind, dissecting the narrative, assessing risks and potential angles. When Eleanor finished, silence filled the virtual space. Chloe leaned closer to her camera. Prescott and Thorne, she mused, a predatory gleam in her eyes. A merger made in hell. This goes way beyond attempted murder, doesn't it? Financial manipulations, power plays. Thorne's built an empire on skeletons. She glanced at Miller. David Miller finally spoke, his voice calm and measured. Miss Prescott, your situation is extraordinarily dangerous. Thorne has vast resources. If we proceed, discretion isn't just advisable, it's paramount. But he met Eleanor's gaze through the screen. Your testimony, if corroborated, is powerful, especially the premeditated attempt on your life. The plan began to form. Running was futile. Legal action alone, without irrefutable proof, against a man like Thorne was risky and slow. They needed something definitive, something undeniable. They needed Julian Thorne. In his own words, "I can get him to meet me." Eleanor said suddenly, the idea taking shape even as she spoke it. "He's arrogant. He thinks I'm broken, defeated. If I reach out, pretend I regret running, that I'm desperate. He might agree to a private meeting to gloat, to ensure my silence." Chloe and David exchanged a look. "It was incredibly high risk. Using you as bait." David started, hesitant. "It's the only way," Eleanor insisted, her voice gaining strength. "He won't suspect it. Not from me. Not now." Ethan shifted beside her, his jaw tight. He hated the idea, hated putting her back in the lion's den, but he saw the determined set of her chin. This was her fight, her choice. The plan solidified over the next few days through more secure calls. They chose a location, an abandoned ski lodge, higher up the mountain range, accessible but remote, closed for years. David's contacts would quietly secure access. Chloe would handle the tech, a state-of-the-art miniature microphone and transmitter for Eleanor's secure communication lines for the team waiting outside. David would coordinate with a trusted, vetted unit of state police ready to move in on his signal, ensuring official protocols were followed meticulously to make the arrest stick. "All right," Chloe said during a planning call, reviewing the technical setup. Wire-tested frequency secured. Another privileged predator thinking he's above the law. Love these ones. David adjusted his glasses, offering a wry counterpoint. "Let's ensure the evidence is airtight before we celebrate Chloe." Due process applies even to would-be murderers with offshore accounts. His calm professionalism was a necessary anchor to Chloe's fiery zeal. Ethan listened to the planning, his role relegated mostly to the periphery, scouting the area around the lodge from a distance, familiarizing himself with access roads and potential escape routes, ensuring their own cabin remained secure. He trusted Bennett and Miller's expertise, but the waiting, the knowledge of the danger Eleanor was walking into, gnawed at him. One quiet evening, he found her sitting by the window, staring out at the now familiar woods. "You don't have to do this, Eleanor," he said softly, standing behind her. "There might be another way." She turned, her expression clear. "What way, Ethan? Wait until his men find us again. Wait until they succeed. No, this ends now. On my terms." She reached out briefly, touching his hand. "I'm scared. but I'm more scared of living the rest of my life looking over my shoulder. We'll be careful. David and Chloe know what they're doing." He squeezed her hand, acknowledging her resolve, the fear in his own gut warring with admiration. "We'll be careful," he echoed. The day arrived faster than seemed possible, cloaked in a tense grey mist that clung to the mountains. They acquired the burner phone Eleanor would use to contact Thorne. Setting the bait, the message was sent, pleading remorseful, requesting a final private conversation at the abandoned Black Bear Lodge. Thorne, arrogant and confident as ever, agreed. Ethan drove Eleanor towards the trailhead leading to the lodge, the silence in the truck thick with unspoken tension. He would be part of the background maintenance crew Chloe had arranged as cover near the lodge, just another local in flannel, visible but ignorable. At the drop-off point, Eleanor took the small, discreet earpiece from Chloe Bennett, who had arrived separately with David Miller. The wire was already secured beneath her simple, dark clothing. "Mic check," Chloe murmured, watching levels on a handheld device. "Clear reception. David will be your primary voice. Police are staged 2 miles out, ready to roll on his command. Stick to the plan, Eleanor. Get the admission." Eleanor nodded her face, pale but determined. She looked at Ethan one last time, her eyes conveying everything words couldn't. He gave her a single firm nod, his heart aching with a fear he couldn't show. She turned, took a deep, steadying breath, and started walking up the overgrown path towards the dark, silent silhouette of the Black Bear Lodge. Ethan watched her go, a lone figure disappearing into the mist, and the trees walking willingly towards the man who had tried to erase her. The trap was set, the wait began, and the silence felt heavier than ever before. The air inside the Black Bear Lodge was cold, heavy with the scent of dust, decay, and forgotten memories. Rotting tapestries clung to the walls, and ghostly shapes of furniture lay draped in white sheets. Sunlight struggled to pierce the grime-coated windows, casting long, eerie shadows across the warped wooden floor. Eleanor stood near the massive, cold stone fireplace, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Every nerve felt frayed, hyper-alert. The tiny earpiece was almost imperceptible. But David Miller's calm, intermittent murmur was a lifeline in the oppressive silence. "Stay calm, Eleanor. Let him come to you. Remember the objective." Footsteps echoed from the grand, decaying entrance hall. Heavy, expensive shoes on dusty wood, deliberate, confident. Eleanor instinctively straightened her shoulders, schooling her features into the fragile, remorseful mask she'd practiced. Julian Thorne stepped through the archway, appearing utterly unfazed by the dilapidated surroundings. He was dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, a stark contrast to the lodge's ruin, looking every inch the master of any universe he chose to enter. He paused, surveying the room, his gaze landing on Eleanor with a predatory stillness, before a slow, patronizing smile spread across his face. "Eleanor," he said, his voice, smooth as poisoned silk, spreading his arms slightly, as if welcoming back a wayward possession. So the little bird decided to fly back to the gilded cage. "You finally came to your senses." She didn't move towards him. "Julian, thank you for meeting me." Her voice trembled slightly, partly acting, partly genuine fear. I wanted to talk privately." He approached her slowly, circling her like a shark, his eyes cold despite the smile. "Privately. After the spectacle you created, the embarrassment I gave you everything, Eleanor. A future people only dream of the Thorne name or, beside Prescott, power, legacy, and you threw it all away." He stopped in front of her close enough for her to smell his expensive cologne. "For what some childish notion of freedom, love." He laughed, a short, humorless sound. I didn't throw anything away, she said, forcing steadiness into her voice, meeting his gaze directly. You tried to take my life. Julian clicked his tongue, feigning exasperation. Oh, Eleanor, darling, please. Still so dramatic. Kill you. He waved a dismissive hand. Don't be absurd. I merely instructed my men to retrieve you, perhaps scare you a little, shake some sense into you after your reckless stunt. You always did have a flair for theatrics. Keep him talking, David's voice murmured in her ear. Intent. We need clear intent. Eleanor didn't flinch from his gaze. Scare me, they chased me up a mountain. They ran Miguel off the road, and they watched me dangling off a cliff, Julian. They watched. His smile tightened, fractionally. Unfortunate circumstances. You put yourself in that position. A regrettable accident averted by my team's timely intervention. As I recall, the official report stated, there was no intervention. She shot back, letting a tremor of anger, real this time, enter her voice. They pushed the branch I was holding, pushed it. They meant for me to fall. Julian's eyes narrowed, the charming facade cracking just enough to reveal the ice beneath. You made things difficult, he said. His voice, losing its silky quality, hardening, more difficult than they needed to be. You should have just walked down the aisle. Eleanor played your part. We both would have been richer, adored, untouchable. This little drama was entirely unnecessary, untouchable. She challenged. You think money power makes attempted murder disappear. Power, he corrected her, leaning in slightly, his voice dropping to a low, menacing purr, makes inconvenient truths irrelevant. I own judges. Eleanor, politicians, journalists. Your little outburst here, whatever you think you're accomplishing. He chuckled darkly. It's pathetic, naive. Now Eleanor, David urged softly. Ask him directly. The order. Eleanor took a shaky breath, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. So you admit it then? That you orchestrated the whole thing? Julian's smile vanished, completely replaced by a cold mask of impatience. Admit what? That I cleaned up your mess? That I protected the family names? Yours and mine. From your impulsive foolishness, no. She said, her voice ringing surprisingly clear in the dusty air. Admit that you wanted me gone. That you paid those men. That you ordered them to make sure I didn't survive that fall. There was a beat of charged silence. Julian stared at her, his eyes like chips of obsidian. The mask didn't just slip. It fell away entirely, revealing the ruthless predator beneath. He took a step closer, invading her space. His voice, a low, vicious growl. You were a liability, a loose end. You threatened everything. He practically spat the words. I gave you a life most women would kill for, and you spat on it. You were supposed to be an asset, but you became problematic. His gaze was glacial. Those men had simple instructions: ensure the problem was resolved permanently. You were never, ever supposed to survive. The raw, undisguised admission hung in the air, cold and sharp as death itself. Eleanor done it. She had the confession, signal activated. David's voice, confirmed instantly in her ear. Calm amidst the impending storm, Julian saw the flicker in her eyes. Not fear this time, but something else. Triumph. He didn't have time to process it. Just as he raised a hand, perhaps to grab her, perhaps to strike her, the distant sound erupted, sirens growing rapidly louder, screaming through the mountain. Quiet. His head snapped up, surprise momentarily overriding the anger. Then the heavy lodge doors burst open. Uniformed officers flooded the room, weapons drawn beams from tactical flashlights, cutting through the gloom. State police. Freeze hands where we can see them. The commands echoed off the high, dusty ceilings. Julian spun around, momentarily stunned into inaction. He released Eleanor instantly, his eyes darting towards possible exits, the arrogance draining from his face, replaced by disbelief and dawning panic. David Miller rushed in, close behind the first wave of officers, holding up a small digital recorder. Chloe Bennett was right beside him, her own phone camera capturing the scene. Julian Thorne. David announced, his voice clear and authoritative over the commotion. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, among other pending charges. We have your full confession recorded. He held up the device. Every incriminating word. Julian's eyes widened in horror as the full weight of the trap slammed down on him. He started to bluster. This is outrageous, preposterous. Do you know who I... But his words were cut off as officers efficiently moved in, forcing his hands behind his back, the sharp click of handcuffs echoing in the suddenly tense room just outside the main doors. Ethan, who had instinctively moved forward with the initial police surge, but held back, as instructed, saw Julian being restrained. Simultaneously, he heard a crackle on a nearby officer's radio perimeter. Secure. Thorne's secondary team, 2 individuals, apprehended attempting to flee the South Access Road, all accounted for. Inside, the adrenaline that had sustained Eleanor abruptly vanished. Her legs gave out. She gasped, swaying, the room spinning before she could fall. Strong arms caught her. Ethan was there, having pushed through as soon as Thorne was secured, his face etched with relief and fierce pride. She collapsed against him, burying her face in his familiar flannel shirt, her body finally succumbing to the violent trembling she'd held back for so long. Not just from fear, now, but from the bone-deep relief of survival, of release. The weight she had carried, the terror that had stalked her, finally, blessedly starting to fall away. You did it, Ethan, whispered, holding her tightly, his own voice thick with emotion. You did it, Eleanor. She clung to him, taking shuddering breaths, the sounds of police procedure fading into the background. No. She managed her voice, muffled but steadying, finding an anchor in his strength. We did. The final act was over. The price of justice was beginning to be paid. The fall of Julian Thorne echoed far beyond the quiet mountains. News outlets feasted on the scandal. The billionaire fiancé, the Prescott heiress, presumed dead. The dramatic arrest, the whispers of financial corruption, now under intense investigation. Thorne's carefully constructed empire began to crumble under legal scrutiny and public outrage. Chloe Bennett's reporting, while protecting Eleanor's identity under a court seal as Jane Doe, detailed Thorne's pattern of manipulation and abuse, empowering several other women, previously silenced by fear or settlements, to step forward with their own stories, adding weight to the case. David Miller was meticulously building. Eleanor observed the storm from the quiet sanctuary of Ethan's ranch, insulated, but not untouched. There were depositions to give legal strategies to discuss over secure lines with David, moments where the sheer scale of Julian's betrayal still threatened to overwhelm her. But something fundamental had shifted. The fear was no longer paralyzing. It was fuel. She was no longer just a survivor. She was an architect of her own future. That future required confronting the past one last time. Weeks after Thorne's arrest, shielded by David Miller's arrangements, Eleanor agreed to meet her parents. Not at a sterile law office, but on neutral ground, a quiet botanical garden, conservatory far from the city bustle. Her father, looking older and diminished, spoke first, his words, steeped in damage control and the preservation of the Prescott name. He talked of weathering the storm, of rebuilding trust in Prescott Capital, of her eventually resuming her rightful place. Her mother, elegant as always, but with lines of strain around her eyes, murmured apologies about not understanding, about being misled by Julian's charm. Eleanor listened patiently, the old instincts to appease, to shrink, rising briefly, before she firmly pushed them down. When they finished, she met their eyes, her gaze clear and steady. "My rightful place," she stated calmly, "is not beside you, Father," pretending this was just poor judgment. It was complicity born from prioritizing deals over your daughter's safety. "And Mother," she turned to the older woman, "you weren't misled. You chose not to see because the alternative was inconvenient." She saw a flicker of hurt, maybe guilt in her mother's eyes. Her mother started to protest. "Eleanor, darling, that's unfair." We simply thought Eleanor held up a hand, cutting off the excuse, gently but firmly. "No, it's not unfair. It's the truth." A wry, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. "Humor, Spot. One hint. Perhaps navigating actual predators prepared me for the corporate kind." She took a breath, letting the moment settle, establishing her boundary. "I don't hate you, but I cannot return to that life or that way of thinking I control my future. Now I will need access to my trust fund. David has the details. But my involvement with Prescott Capital ends here." She stood, the meeting concluded on her terms. Leaving them amidst the sterile beauty of the orchids, she felt a profound sense of release. The final chain had been broken. Back at the ranch, life unfolded with a quiet purpose. Eleanor, working with David and Chloe, used a significant portion of her newly accessed funds, not for herself, but to establish a foundation dedicated to supporting victims of corporate and domestic abuse, providing legal aid and resources for those trapped in silence. She also made a quiet, substantial investment in the local farmers' co-op, providing the capital needed for the strategic improvements she had outlined, helping secure its future. A tangible way of giving back to the community that had unknowingly sheltered her evenings were spent with Ethan, the easy silence now filled with shared plans and quiet laughter. They talked about the future, about what truly mattered. One evening, watching fireflies dance over the darkening fields, the conversation turned towards family. "I always imagined having kids," Eleanor admitted softly, surprising herself. "But never in that old life, it wouldn't have been fair to them." Ethan nodded, understanding unspoken complexities. "This life," he said, gesturing to the vast, peaceful landscape. "It's quiet. Good for raising things. Crops, animals." He paused, looking at her. Maybe kids too. They talked about possibilities, about creating a real family built on love, not legacy. The idea of adoption surfaced naturally. Imagine Ethan mused with a slight smile, trying to explain stock options versus crop rotation. At bedtime, Eleanor laughed, picturing it. "Humor Spot, too. We might need a very specific kind of parenting manual." She agreed. The shared dream took root, a quiet promise for the future. A few weeks later, on a clear, crisp autumn afternoon, Ethan asked Eleanor to take a walk with him, a familiar request. But instead of their usual path, he led her upwards towards the south cliff. Her steps faltered slightly as they neared the edge, old memories flickering, but Ethan's hand was warm and steady in hers. He led her through the thinned trees to the very precipice where her life had nearly ended. But the place was transformed. Gone were the jagged rocks and tangled undergrowth near the edge. In their place stood a simple, beautifully crafted wooden platform, extending just far enough to offer a breathtaking panoramic view of the valley bathed in golden afternoon light. A sturdy cedar handrail framed the edge, and pots of resilient wildflowers bloomed cheerfully along the path leading to it. A single smooth wooden bench faced the horizon. Eleanor stopped her breath, catching in her throat, tears welling in her eyes. "Ethan, you did this." He nodded, his gaze soft, full of unspoken emotion. "I wanted to give this place back to you, Eleanor. Not as the place where everything almost ended, but as the place where your new beginning truly started." He stepped onto the platform, turning to face her. "You chose to live right here. You fought for it." He reached into his pocket, pulling out not a ring box, but something small, braided and familiar. A simple bracelet woven from a piece of the rough, sturdy rope he had used to save her. He'd kept a piece, just as she might have. Or perhaps this was his own way of marking the moment. He took her hand, gently sliding the rope bracelet onto her wrist. It felt rough, strong, real. "Now," he said, his voice thick with feeling, his eyes holding hers, "will you choose to live that new beginning with me?" Tears slipped freely down Eleanor's cheeks. Tears of profound joy, of release, of arriving home in a way she never thought possible. She couldn't speak for a moment. She simply threw her arms around his neck, holding him tightly, nodding against his shoulder. "Yes," she whispered the word, encompassing everything. "Yes, Ethan. Always. Yes." Their wedding several months later was everything her first one wasn't supposed to be. Small, simple, deeply personal, held in the meadow near the ranch under a clear blue sky. Guests sat on borrowed wooden benches, close friends, supportive neighbors, Chloe and David among them. Eleanor walked down the grassy aisle, barefoot, radiant, in a simple linen dress she had helped design, holding Ethan's hand. Beside them, skipping happily and occasionally tossing flower petals with charming inaccuracy, was Sophie, a bright-eyed, resilient 5-year-old girl they had recently welcomed into their home through adoption, her laughter echoing like wind chimes across the meadow. Humor spot. 3 Hint, Sophie, already firmly attached to Ethan's gentle horse, wore a smaller dress matching Eleanor's. Their vows weren't about mergers or legacies, but about shared survival, chosen love, patience, healing, and the promise of building a life together, day by quiet day. As they exchanged simple bands, one of Ethan's horses grazing nearby let out a loud, contented whicker, making the small crowd chuckle. Humor spot 4. Later, as the sun began to dip low, painting the sky in strokes of orange, and rose the small gathering shared food and stories near the cabin. There was no grand reception, no societal pressure, just genuine warmth and shared happiness. As dusk settled, casting long shadows, Ethan, Eleanor, and little Sophie walked hand in hand up the now familiar path to the transformed cliff overlook. They stood together on the platform, the vast, peaceful valley spread out before them, the first stars beginning to appear in the twilight sky. Sophie stood between them, holding tightly to both their hands, gazing out with wonder. There were no grand pronouncements, no dramatic rides into the sunrise. Just the 3 of them, breathing in the cool mountain air, surrounded by a quiet that was no longer threatening, but deeply comforting. The scars of the past remained woven into the fabric of who they were, but they no longer defined them. Here on the edge of the world that had once terrified her, Eleanor Prescott, now simply Eleanor, stood firmly grounded, wrapped in Ethan's embrace, their daughter between them, finally truly free. They had faced the darkness and chosen the light. This was not a fairy tale ending. It was something far more precious, an earned peace, and the quiet, hopeful promise of tomorrow. standing there on the edge of a world that once held only terror, now transformed into a place of peace. Ethan Eleanor and little Sophie remind us that our deepest scars don't have to define our future. How often do we find that true freedom isn't about escaping the past, but about bravely choosing how we stand in the present? Perhaps home isn't just a place we find, but a state of being. We build moment by moment, choice by courageous choice. This journey from the edge of darkness back into the light truly resonated with us, highlighting the quiet strength found in kindness and the incredible power of resilience. If their story touched you too, we'd love to hear your reflections. What does choosing your own beginning mean to you after hearing Eleanor's story? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. We also truly value your feedback as we strive to bring you meaningful narratives. If you have any thoughts on how we can make our stories even more impactful, or specific suggestions about today's story or narration style that could help us improve, please let us know in the comments. Your insights are incredibly important and help us grow. If this story of second chances and finding strength after trauma touched your heart, please show your support with a like. And if you feel this message might bring hope or comfort to someone else, please consider sharing it with them. For more stories that explore the depths of the human spirit, the challenges we overcome, and the enduring power of hope, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell so you won't miss the next journey. Thank you so much for watching and spending this time with us. Remember, even the steepest cliffs can eventually lead to the most beautiful views. Take care, and we'll see you in the next story.